A weak mix could be the only thing standing in the way of your band getting signed or you picking up more work as a producer. After giving brutally honest feedback to your mix submissions, I keep seeing the same problems come up again and again. So I'm going to show you what they are and how to fix your mix. I think that's Ultimate Heavy Drums. That sounds like the Mapex snare. Sounds good. Ooh, headless. Don't know about that. Sorry. Yeah, no, the mix sounds pretty good. Nothing glaringly wrong. I think maybe because it's programmed drums or then maybe played on electric kit, maybe you could just experiment with some of the snare velocities just to get a bit more dynamics in there for that sort of playing. But it sounds really good. Vocals at a good level. Some cynic vibes. There was a lot of coming through on that snare hit then. I think it's either a lot of like high end and noise floor, or maybe it's the snare wires, snare bottom that's just a bit too loose, but that could probably be tightened up with a bit of gating or some kind of like multi-band expanding on the top end. Yeah, the high end really lingers on the snare there, and that's going to kind of get in the way a bit in the mix. The vocals remind me of Carl from Earth Tone 9. Don't know if you're familiar with them. But the cymbals are a bit too harsh in this one. Yeah, that was coming through on the cymbals there. So I think this is something that I'm going to see quite a lot of in these videos. I think people get quite carried away with getting rid of loads of low end from their cymbals and trying to remove as much of the drums. The problem is you get left with really thin cymbals that just kind of just go on top of the entire mix. So I think people sometimes forget or are afraid to maybe do like a low pass filter on their overheads, which is fine to do, you know, around like 15K, just have an experiment with it. It depends on the room, the cymbals and the mics that we use. So cymbals can vary drastically with any of those things, any of those variables being different. Now, I don't know if these are programmed drums or not, but it sounds like maybe the cymbals, the overheads, maybe they've been compressed a bit too much, but all I'm hearing is just consistently over the entire mix, not enough kind of articulation in that crash, which can be quite hard to get right. It depends on like how it was tracked, how it was played, how it was programmed, or what kind of processing, but it's quite harsh. So let's try and see if we can find that area. So this is a tricky one. I mean, 6K is, you know, where you want your cymbals to kind of live to a degree, but it's quite harsh in that area. 6 to 7K. And the top end from those keyboards is kind of like locking in with the high end on the cymbals, which is kind of just creating this like on top of the rest of the mix. So it's a tricky one. You definitely want your cymbals to kind of cut through, but I think the common mistake is removing too much low end or maybe even boosting high end on cymbals because people see them as this kind of high end thing. If you listen to someone like Zach Savini's mixes, Zach Savini's done like the last few Architects records. I did a few records that he mixed for us. Bring Me the Horizon, Parkway Drive. He really does a great job with his overheads. They sound kind of loud and pumping and exciting, but they're not too bright, not too harsh, and they don't get in the way of the vocals, and they don't just kind of sit on top of the mix like shh. So definitely check out his mixes in terms of like a nice dark overhead cymbal sound. this sounds pretty cool to me. Nothing too glaringly wrong with the mix. I think the playing could be enhanced, particularly on the guitar tracks. I can tell that the playing is at a decent standard, but it just feels a little bit woolly. So getting a bit tighter on the guitar tracking could really help elevate this. Stuff like that, where it's like dum 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 dum, and a big like in there. You know, just paying way more attention to detail, spending more time. I've actually spent the last 2 years recording and re-recording a masterclass all about recording and editing tight metal rhythm guitars that will be available soon. If you sign up to the mailing list, you'll hear about it through there. To really help people kind of get to grips with the best approaches for recording, tackling riffs, and editing, and not really relying on editing quite as much. But the mix sounds pretty good. The guitars, as I say, a bit woolly. If they were just picked a bit harder, a bit tighter with the playing, that would elevate things. But the playing is obviously good, but I think I could tell that the playing could be better if they spent more time on the tracking. Again, this is a good mix. The main thing that's laying it down is just that on the crash. I think getting cymbals right is really tricky, and I still struggle with it. I'm not saying I get like the best cymbal sounds you've ever heard, but that's the most glaring thing that sticks out to me. This is a good mix, and I'm just nitpicking, but that kind of just sat on top of everything can kind of get in the way and take away from, you know, listening to the guitars. So one thing we can see in FabFilter here, the high end is greatly outweighing the low end on the mix in general. Especially the low end on your kick, really not peaking that high. Now what I'm doing there isn't ideal for the mix as a whole, but when I turn this off, you really hear it get a bit thin, and the high end on the cymbals just kind of sounds way too harsh. So the main thing I'm hearing here is the cymbals sound like they're mono. So I don't know if it's just like a mono cymbal mic or a mono room mic that's really loud in the mix, but there's like no separation on the left and right. I think the playing overall could be tightened up, so I don't know if this was tracked to a click, but it seems like there's some playing discrepancies going on. There was like sounds like a vocal edit there. It sounds like the vocals have been tracked through like a laptop as a microphone. Yeah, I definitely think the vocal production could be better. They're kind of buried, but also sound really lo-fi. I think the timing between the drums, guitars, and vocals is all a bit disjointed. So really locking in on the performances would definitely just elevate things. Sounds like someone's been listening to Tool. So that bass tone is pretty harsh. I mean, I've gone quite extreme there, but this in particular is really harsh. Now, if you want quite a mid-rangey bass sound, the best thing to do is to kind of lock it in on the DI. So get a multi-band compressor compressing the DI, making sure that those higher notes aren't just leaping out loads more, or just the way that you're picking them. And then compress the bass again with a general compressor before it hits the amp or amp sim, and try and just even out the playing with compression and just the way that you play. Because if you want a mid-rangey tone, the balance kind of shifts so much when those notes come in that it's just way too extreme. So you could try and tackle that with some like dynamic EQ. Mix on the whole sounds pretty good, pretty pro. I think the bass guitar, I'm assuming the bassist is playing with their fingers because it sounds like finger style. Yeah, I think the bassist plays with their fingers. The problem with fingerstyle bass is just getting the balance of the low end to high end to sit right. And the bass tone here is pretty cool, but it's just kind of occupying just a little bit too much, around like 100 hertz maybe. And the guitars are quite nasal sounding, sound a bit like a duck quacking, like wah, wah, wah. So maybe a little less high mids and a bit more like note area, like 400. Let's have a listen. So again, I'm not saying this is a bad bass tone by any means. I can tell that's a bassist, bass player playing with fingers. Probably takes a lot of pride in their tone. It's just a little bit too much in this area. And I can see there's a huge hole here in that 400 hertz area, which you could get a bit more of your guitars coming through here. Not much, just a little bit. It just feels like there's a big gap in the mix in that area. And the thing with downtuned guitars, 400 hertz is where the note clarity is. So don't remove too much of this if you downtune quite a lot. Again, it's quite bright, quite harsh. The cymbals are a little bit harsh. You hear quite a lot of this and a lot of like djenty guitar tones with low tunings. It's kind of like annoying, but I guess you do need a bit of that in there. That's really just the cymbals, just a little bit too bright there compared to the rest of the mix. But yeah, the main thing that stood out to me was really the bass guitars just occupying a little bit too much in this area. And it's got quite a fieldy, kind of clacky high end to it. I'd maybe just try adding a little bit more of like 600 to 800 on the bass just to get a bit more like gargle in there. But I can't really do that on the whole mix to really show you what I mean. So the bass guitar is way too like just woolly and occupying way too much in that, I guess, like 100, 150 area. I mean, it could just be that you recorded the bass with dead strings, or it's just not got enough kind of mid-range or high-end on the bass to really kind of even things out, but it's a bit too much in the low end there. And just a bit too much fizz on those guitars. They're just way too bright for me. But yeah, that sort of riffing, you want to be doing some really locked in down picking. You want to turn yourself into a machine. So we have a classic case of really bright cymbals yet again. I don't know if that's like Metal Machine drums there, but the cymbals, if it's the Easy Drummer one, don't need any more high end added to them. They're already kind of pre-mixed if it is that. Yeah, got a lot going on here in your guitars. So yeah, the kick drum and the bass are kind of really clashing, and there's a lot of low end on the bass around here. I can still hear a lot of high end on the cymbals there. Again, pretty hard to kind of add this EQ to an entire mix, but there's some stuff in the high end on the guitars to take out and on the cymbals that's just adding a bit too much harshness in that top end. Not a bad mix. I think the guitars are maybe a little bit too loud. Maybe a guitarist mixed this. And the snare drum feels like it's lacking quite a lot of body. It sounds quite thin. So that's not really feeling big enough, I guess, like for this sort of music. Vocals could be a little bit clearer, a little bit louder maybe. I'm very familiar with this record, the Roadrunner United album. I bought it when I was younger, and I used to watch the DVD a lot because I like anything studio documentary wise. And Andy Sneap and Colin Richardson mixed it. So I'm very familiar with this mix, and it sounds pretty good, pretty authentic to the original. No critique from me. Great work. That guitar tone will not cut the mustard. I would say you need to elevate your setup in terms of whatever you're using for guitars. So whether you've used real amps and mic'd up something you have, or if you can get your hands on a different plugin or some different impulse responses that are going to get you a better tone. So let's have a listen just to the guitars. That is an insane dip around here. That's crazy. Got a lot of this. You've only really got this muddy area left in terms of the low mids. I'm hearing a lot of that. A bit nasally here. I don't know, I don't think this is a vintage 30 speaker by the looks of it. Yeah, it's very kind of fizzy in the top end and kind of woolly, not very defined and tight. I would look at upgrading something in your rig. Maybe if this is a real amp, a new cabinet and maybe a better microphone. I don't know what you've used here. Yeah, this scoop is pretty wild. I don't know if that's just something you've done in the mix or that's part of just the sound coming out of the amp or the speaker. Bass a little bit bright, guitars could be a little bit louder, I think, in that one. So as I suspected, the biggest problem in a lot of these mixes was the cymbals and the overheads. And these are commonly the most overlooked area of people's mixes. But if you get these wrong, they're going to destroy your entire mix. And then the next thing is just putting way more emphasis on getting better performances when it comes to tracking guitars. So spending way more time than you think it takes, and really focus on getting the tightest results you can. Because if you have really tight performances, it's going to elevate the entire mix. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, I've spent the past 2 years creating a masterclass all around recording and editing ultra tight rhythm guitars. And if you want to hear more about that, then you can sign up to the mailing list link below. This is not an instructional guitar course. This is not for people looking to get better at guitar. This is for people looking to record guitars to a really high standard, learning my recording techniques, editing techniques, to elevate your mixes by capturing really, really tight performances. But seeing as the weakest link in a lot of these mixes was cymbals and overheads, you need to spend a bit more time paying attention to your drum mixes, so check this video out next.